It's more than 2 weeks since demonstrations erupted against banks and corporations across the United States, but little is known about what is driving these protests. And as the spotlight turns on the latest arrests of protesters, questions are surfacing on whether the U.S. administration will manage to defuse the rage. This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. It is good to have you with us. I'm Divi Gopalan. So, as our campaign enters its third week, the Occupy Wall Street's demonstrators in New York have vowed to continue their actions. Their movement gained momentum after hundreds were arrested as they attempted to cross Brooklyn Bridge on Saturday. Now, they're growing in numbers and becoming more organized. The group has displayed a map of the country identifying 21 places where other protests are taking place. Wall Street-style demonstrations with names like Occupy Los Angeles, Occupy Chicago and Occupy Boston were staged in front of Federal Reserve buildings in those cities. The group also says they're planning a major rally on Wednesday. Al Jazeera's Kristen Salumi met some of the demonstrators on Wall Street.
Manhattan's financial district has been home to a couple hundred demonstrators for 2 weeks now. They say they are calling attention to wealth inequality in the United States, and their movement appears to be gaining traction. Organizers estimate more than 2,000 people tried to march across the Brooklyn Bridge on Saturday. Police arrested more than 700 of them for disorderly conduct when the march veered onto the roadway, stopping traffic.
I don't think there's any negative impact on morale from the arrests. I think if anything, it just makes people more determined for the cause.
Similar protests have sprung up in other cities like Boston and San Francisco. Some unions, whose members have been hit hard by the faltering economy, are also joining the movement.
This is the park where they've been camped out essentially for the last 2 weeks. If anything, their numbers are growing. You can see that people have tents and sleeping bags. There's food being distributed.
The group has been criticized for having a vague agenda, but their message seems to be getting through.
So I think that's a very important statement that people are saying that corporations are too powerful and that we need a balance of power, much more of a balance of power.
A still small but determined band of demonstrators who plan to take their protest back on the streets and onto Washington, D.C. in the coming days. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, New York.
So what do they want? Well, according to their website, the Occupy Wall Street movement has no specific goals or demands. However, a support group that joined recent protests, calling itself the General Assembly of New York, has listed some of the possible goals of the current protests. Starting with the imposition of a Robin Hood tax on all financial transactions worldwide with the goal of taking from the rich to give to the poor. They're also calling for rebooting the system and rewriting the Constitution. The concept here seems to be a reference to a plan to push for a new progressive U.S. Constitution by the year 2020. And finally, reinstatement of the Glass-Steagall Act, which sought to enforce more government regulations of the banking industry, giving the Federal Reserve the authority to regulate interest rates on savings accounts. Well, joining us now are three guests. In Washington, D.C., Dean Baker, co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research. In Manchester, Charlie Wolf, a conservative political commentator. And in New York, we have someone who's been involved in the protest, Camille Rivera. We welcome you all. I'd like to start with Camille Rivera. Many are confused by the nature of these protests, and I was wondering whether you could narrow down what you or your group are campaigning for.
Well, just to be clear on, we're not necessarily the lead organizers to this. Our organization is called United New York, and we're an organization that helps to organize low-wage workers in New York. And so we have, we weren't an integral part involved in leading these protests, but we have been in solidarity, are in charge of organizing an October 5th community and labor rally that's going to happen in the next couple days to show solidarity and support. And I think what you're finding is that what they're trying to get at is that, you see the groups that are down there right now and have been down there for the last couple days. And what you're seeing right now is unemployed people. You're seeing people from across the city, from across the country, going out there and saying a message, saying enough is enough. Big banks and corporations need to take responsibility, that people are tired of going into their pockets and suffering from what is not their responsibility, but the responsibility of our government to help us create jobs. And these people want to go back to work. They're tired of being abused, and I think this is what you're seeing right now.
Charlie Wolf, we've heard what the protests are about. We've heard about what the protesters want. Camille Rivera has expressed what their ultimate desire will be. Is this the way to get it? And are these protests having any desired impact?
No, it just sounds intellectually fallacious. It just, listening to Camille just a second ago, made no sense. If this was something said in a class, I'd have kicked her out of the classroom. They're petitioning for jobs, so we're going to protest and we're going to hinder the people that actually create the jobs. This makes no sense to me. Wall Street, for all its faults, and it does have faults, are still the people that are the job creators. The problem here is you have a White House that's standing in the way with oppressive tax rates and uncertainty as to what they're doing, and that's why capital is being held back. And let's not forget that money on Wall Street is also the money that's in most people's 401k retirement funds, so they want to work very carefully with it, and they don't want to see the market going up and down. So, if you want to protest, I think you're protesting to the wrong people, and quite frankly, I don't know what you're protesting about. It just sounds a lot of right-on sister soldier moments and solidarity and all that sort of stuff, but it just sounds meaningless to me.
Camille Baker, it sounds meaningless to Charlie Wolf. Is there a way you can convince him that this is actually having some kind of an impact and making change and making people listen?
I think people are listening. You've seen national outlets covering this, including this network right here, wondering what is actually going on. I think that the banks are responsible for people being out of work, and they are supposed to be economic drivers, but they're not being economic drivers. They're taking millions of dollars and billions of payouts, and then they're cutting jobs at the same time. I mean, Bank of America is a perfect example. Got billions of dollars in bailouts and now cutting jobs even more. They cut like a couple 100,000 jobs in the last couple of weeks. So, I mean, I really don't understand his argument around the fact that low-wage people aren't getting, hurt by the fact that the big banks who were responsible for this economic crisis, people are starting to fight back. They're sending a message. They're saying enough is enough. And I think it's totally fair for them to go out there and speak out and say, you know what? I'm a worker. I'm an unemployed person. I'm a student. I am a retiree. I'm a person whose Medicare can potentially get cut. And you are responsible. And I need you to take social responsibility along with our government to help create jobs. I think that is the message that they're trying to convey out there. And I don't think it's very fair. These people are out there, camping out there because they have no one else to talk to. People are not listening to them. And I think that's why they're out there.
Okay, Charlie Wolf, I saw some quite intense reaction from you there. What were you trying to say?
Well, again, she makes no sense. She's complaining because the banks got a bailout. Now, some of us think that the banks maybe shouldn't have had a bailout. That's a fair debate, though it was more of a shoring up of credit than it was bailing out of banks. I think the terminology was wrong. But, on the one hand, part of that mess was caused by community activists forcing banks to make loans to people who could not pay them back. So you can't just blame the banks here. Some of it goes back to the Community Reinvestment Act under the Carter administration, Acorn pushing for these loans, people buying loans that, again, they could not afford, thinking, well, the housing market, I'm going to ride the wave here, and I'm going to buy a 5-room, bedroom mansion when all I really need is a simple little bungalow. So there's a lot to this, and we're listening to these arguments, and it really makes no sense. And I don't think it's catching on. Yeah, it's getting some media attention, but 7,000 people in New York is really not what I would call a major protest.
Okay, let's try and make some sense of both sides of the argument. I'm going to go to Dean Baker and ask you, as you've heard Charlie Wolf saying that it makes no sense, this is not the way to get the economy going. On the other side, Camille Rivera says, people have to be on the streets to get what they want and get their jobs back. Where do you stand on this?
Well, Charlie Walls made a comment about how he'd throw Camille out of his classroom. I'd throw him out of my classroom. He's repeating right-wing talking points that have nothing to do with reality. You know, when he talks about job creators, let's stop playing games. We're talking about banks and businesses. Job creators is a stupid thing that came from Rush Limbaugh. Let's talk substance here. When you talk about banks being forced to give loans by community activists, they were getting money hand over fist. The Community Reinvestment Act been on the books since 1977. It was toothless. No one forced these banks to make money on these loans. They were making bad loans because they knew that they could give them over to Goldman Sachs, have them anything packaged off into mortgage-backed security and sold everywhere in the world. These people are absolutely right to be outraged. The banks are better off than ever. We see that corporate profits are at a record share of GDP. The financial sector share of corporate profits are a new record high. Bonuses are as high as they've ever been. And yet we still have 9.1% unemployment, and we've known how to deal with unemployment for 70 years. Everyone who took an intro econ class learned Keynes. It's an outrage that we don't have a government that can get its act together to get the unemployment rate down. We know how to do it. It is really simple. So yes, people are absolutely right to be outraged.
Charlie Wolf, can I get you to respond to that?
I was going to say, you're actually talking Keynes, and you want me to take you seriously? We already had a stimulus act that wasted how many billion and did absolutely nothing. We have green jobs that are costing us $2 million a job. You know, it's called getting the government out of the way, getting taxes down, getting spending down, giving companies some sort of security in what the future is. You know, the market does not lie. Now, I'm not going to defend the banks. I'm not saying the banks did totally right in things, but that has nothing to do with job creation. And these people are sitting out in the street protesting when actually what they need to be doing is getting out and looking for jobs. It ain't easy, but it's also the companies and the corporations that they're protesting against. You know, they're sitting there with BlackBerries. You know, these are corporations that had people with ideas that spurred on an economy to where I have a BlackBerry that has more memory and power in it than the Apollo moon mission had. You know, I've got 3 computers at home that I would have never had years ago. So why are we fighting corporations when it's the corporations that are the ones that are going to create the jobs and do make our lives a lot better and a lot easier? So, you know, if you want to talk Keynes, you know, that's just pure silliness.
Okay, so definitely both sides of the argument. There's going to be, I think I'll go back to Mr. Dean Baker there. I believe you had something to say?
Yeah, Charlie said the stimulus, he didn't know how many dollars. Well, that's the big problem. You guys got to learn arithmetic. I learned it in 3rd grade. Right-wing economists seem to you never learned it. If you learned arithmetic, you know the stimulus was about $300 billion a year. Get that in your head, $300 billion a year. We are trying to replace about $1.4 trillion. $1.4 trillion. Let me say that 3 times. $1.4 trillion, $1.4 trillion, $1.4 trillion in lost demand because of the collapse of the housing bubble with $300 billion a year. It was not big enough, and we said that at the time. I and many others said that black and white, as clear as day. The stimulus did exactly what it was projected to do. It created between 2 and 3 million jobs. We needed between 10 and 12 million. Do the arithmetic and you wouldn't say such silly things.
Okay, so it seems like the side of Wall Street and the people on the street are not necessarily going to come to any agreement. Now, I want to go back to Camille Rivera and talk about the methodology of these protests also. People have been on the streets for a while. It gained momentum, then it dwindled, and then we had the recent arrests and YouTube videos of police spraying pepper spray, and suddenly, once again, it's got a lot of attention. Are these protests gaining attention for the right reason or gaining traction for the reasons that people are out on the streets, or is this about a day of rage, as some have been calling it?
Right, and I think that that's kind of the rub, right? We're just trying to make sure. I mean, I think that's one of the problems is that, you know, these kids are out there, these people are out there trying to talk about a message around the fact that they're tired, they're sick and tired of big banks and big corporations going out there and not taking responsibility for this economy, that they're out there trying to kind of talk about their message. And at the same time, when they go back and forth and they're having kind of these conflicts with police, that the story is being covered just about that. And I think that what you're starting to see now is them getting stronger about their message. They have an Occupy Wall Street paper. They did 50,000 copies talking about their message, why they're doing what they're doing. I mean, you see old ladies in the street reading this paper down in Wall Street, and even all the way up to kind of the, you know, upper Manhattan. They're definitely trying to gain traction, and they're trying to create a methodology. Yes, we are not going to have thousands of people on the street every single day. And I think what you're going to see on October 5th is another kind of moment where people are going to congregate and gather and then send another message around jobs. I think that's what you're going to see.
Charlie Wolf, you know, there are questions about whether these protests are effective or whether people should be on the streets at all and whether they'll have any kind of impact. But, you know, the fact of the matter is they're now being backed by institutions and unions. For instance, the Federation of Teachers and Transport Workers, which has about 38,000 members, are now backing these protests. So shouldn't the government start listening to what the people on the street have to say if there is dissatisfaction?
Oh, I don't disagree. I think they should be. But, you know, what they shouldn't be doing, as the president has been doing, and I think it's shameful and disgusting, is creating this rhetoric of class warfare. You know, this is the guy that was supposed to be the great uniter, America is all one family, and then goes on and on about corporate jet owners and millionaires and billionaires not paying a fair rate of tax, when in actual fact they are. They're paying more than their fair tax. And these are, again, the guys, as Arthur Laffer said, I was at a luncheon with him about a year ago, and he said, listen, he says, there are people out of work, out of jobs, and this man cares deeply about it. Laffer, for those who don't know, was Reagan's chief economic advisor, and then also worked for Bill Clinton, and said, why would you stand in the way and excoriate, as the president has done, the people that are actually providing and creating the jobs, the businesses? Well, you know, you want to be helping these people and just getting out of their way and letting them create. And that's, you know, if you're going to scream at anybody, scream at the White House for the rhetoric from the president, and also say, get out of the way, leave these people alone, let them create jobs, let them find the innovators and the hard workers and the risk takers, and just let them do their thing. And we are the engine of the world, the economic engine of the world.
Okay, I'm going to take Charlie Wolf's point here, Dean Baker, and say that many of Obama's former supporters, corporations do believe that Obama is turning into a class warrior that is going to change America's freewheeling capitalism into a model not unlike the EU, which is in huge trouble.
Well, I'm really touched that these people are so sensitive. I'm happy to send them a box of Kleenex, you know, that they don't like President Obama's words. The reality is they've got more money than ever, and maybe these people have really bad memories. I don't know. It's a little scary to think people running major corporations can't remember back to President Bush, when we did have deregulation, low taxes, and guess what? We created no jobs and we got an economic disaster. Now let's think back a little further. President Clinton was in the White House when we had the Clinton-era tax rates and all those bad regulations, and guess what? We created 3 million jobs a year. The economy grew an average of 4.6% a year, 1996 to 2000. You know, this idea that somehow regulations and high taxes are strength, this is just an invention. There's nothing in the world to support this. That's why I want to throw this guy out of my classroom. He's saying right-wing talking points have nothing to do with reality.
Charlie Wolf?
If all Mr. Bacon can rely on is ad hominems, we're not going to really get anywhere. If you want to just accuse me of doing right-wing talking points,
people out of your classroom.
The same. Well, you're the one who's talking, you know, right-wing talking points, and you're not really giving substance. Clinton dropped business rates. Reagan dropped business rates. It's a proven model. Again, go back to the Laffer curve. You know, that's again basic economics. You got a guy that's sitting there in the White House that is spending incredibly, spending like it's going out of style, running up bills that we can't afford, and that's why businesses and banks are holding back their capital, because they want to protect it. There's no economic confidence right now thanks to this White House. And standing out there and going on about rich millionaires and their corporate jets who aren't paying their fair share, when in fact the top 1% pay 24 times more than the bottom 50% combined, it's just simple arithmetic, to use your phrase.
Camille Rivera, I want you to take Charlie's point here and tell us, you know, America has an unemployment of about 9%. Is the answer really standing on the streets and blaming Wall Street?
I mean, I just want to go back to the point where my colleague mentioned the fact that people need to get up and go find jobs. These people have been trying to go and find jobs. They cannot find them. They are out there every single day looking for jobs, and they cannot find them. They cannot feed their families. They cannot pay for their homes. Their mortgages are being foreclosed. They have no one else to talk to. They have nowhere else to turn to. They've asked banks. They've talked to the government. There is nothing else that they feel that they can do. I actually am really, really appalled by the conversation around policy and arithmetic. It is about the math, and the fact that billionaires aren't paying their fair share is totally absolutely incorrect when middle class and low wage earners pay more taxes than millionaires alone. So I actually think that we should go back to the math, and that's what Obama has been saying. You know, when people are talking about class warfare, people just have to look at the jobs and look at the numbers, and the numbers speaks for themselves. They could actually help us get out of this economic crisis. They have the responsibility to do so. They got us into this problem to begin with, and it's not just about, you know, the people that I've been on the streets with, working with every single day, who can't afford to feed their families. They're out there. They're getting paid $5 an hour, $6 an hour, and they have nothing else to stand for. They have nothing else to do. And I think that what you're seeing out there is desperation, and I think that they will continue to be out there until their voices are heard. And I think you have not heard the last of what's happening here.
Okay, at the heart of the matter is the reaction of the White House, which we've seen very little of at the moment. One of the big issues is Obama's re-election. Now, is this going to impact Obama's re-election in any way, Dean Baker? Should there be far more reaction to this, or should Obama be staying well away from this?
Well, I think President Obama has to convince a lot of people who voted for him in 2008 they have reason to vote for him again. I mean, he basically did a lot to make sure that the banks and the corporate interests were comfortable, and he's done very little to bring down unemployment. And those who like tax cuts, like my friend here, we actually pay the lowest taxes a share of GDP since before World War II. So, you know, this story that somehow taxes are an onerous burden, the top tax rate was 70% in the 60s when we had 3% unemployment. It's 36% today. You're really hard-pressed to make a story that, you know, the wealthy are being taxed to death. And I think what President Obama has to do is show people that he's on their side, that he's pushing to create jobs, that he's pushing to protect people who face the loss of their home, and rather than just protect the interests of the banks and large corporations. And I think a lot of people identify him with Wall Street with, at this point, I think, some good cause.
So, Charlie Wolf, can Obama do this and show people that he's on their side and yet still cater to Wall Street?
No, he can't, because, and I guess I have to agree to an extent here with my friend in Washington. You know, this is a guy that's going on about the rich corporate jet owners, happens to own a corporate jet himself, and he's seeking $1 billion in campaign finance from Wall Street. This is a guy where most of his donations, if you look at the figures from the last election, didn't come from the small $50, $100 donations, as he claimed. Not to say they weren't there. Most of it came from hedge fund traders and trial lawyers. So, you know, Mr. Obama is trying to please all crowds, and it's just empty rhetoric. And again, to sit here and blame the so-called millionaires for not paying enough. You know, again, let me enrich your young protester in New York who's claiming figures. You know, according to IRS reports in 2009, those who earn between $20,000 and $30,000 pay an average of 2.5% adjusted gross income, compared to those who made at least $1 million, who paid something like 24.4% of AGI. So the rich are paying far more than they need to.
Middle class earners pay like 30 to 40%.
I'm sorry?
Middle class?
No, middle class are paying about
40% of their taxes?
No, middle class, those making between 50 and 60 pay 6.3%, and those at 100 to 125% pay 9.9%, between 200 and 300 17.5%. You know, the thing is, you want to have a little less government and get government out of the way and let markets do what they do. And see, what worries me is it goes a little more than this, because you've got a ragtag of people here. Some are claiming jobs, and that's a fair thing to claim. And, you know, listen, I can understand where the young lady is coming from. I've been out of work myself on many occasions. It's not easy. I had a brother who was unemployed for 2 years. It's not easy. But, you know, you got people there that are community organizers. You got Cass Sunstein. You got Soros's money involved in all of this, wanting to rewrite the Constitution. What's to rewrite? We're talking about a free market system that they want to replace with something that is not a free market system, and that is very dangerous.
Camille Rivera, shouldn't the markets be allowed to do what they want to do, and shouldn't the economy go through the cycle that it must, and to get back on its feet?
I mean, I disagree. I think that there has to be a plan around forcing and ensuring that big banks and millionaires pay their fair share to fund opportunities for economic growth. And I don't think that we can rely on a wild ride of the stock market to get us out of this crisis. We've tried since 2008. We've tried. It's not worked. People are still unemployed. If you go to these homes, if you go to Southeast Queens, it's ravaged in New York. So many foreclosed signs, so many dilapidated homes. I mean, people have lost their lives. And I think that, while I do think that some of the Wall Street occupiers don't necessarily aren't on the same message, I think that the idea that they're trying to convey is that they've had enough and that people have to start to take responsibility. I mean, our organization's goal is to go out there and talk to low-wage workers, people who are unemployed, and help them have a voice because no one is listening. And I don't think that our stock market is going to help us get there. I think that a program, especially the Obama Jobs Act, is going to help us get there. And I mean, I really think that there's nowhere else to go but to a place where, we need more jobs to get us out of this problem.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. I'd like to thank all of our guests for a very feisty and important debate. In Washington, Dean Baker. In Manchester, Charlie Wolf. And in New York, Camille Rivera. Thank you all so much for speaking to us today. And to our viewers, thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. You can email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. But for now, it's goodbye.